In March last year, the government introduced the Disaster Management Act, which regulates curfew, gathering in groups, and not wearing masks in public spaces. Since then, over 400,000 South Africans have spent time behind bars or paid hefty fines of between 500 and 5,000 rand for failing to adhere to the regulations. Within 2 months of the imposition of lockdown, more than 200,000 South Africans were arrested for contravening the rules. Many of those were let go with the option of an admission of guilt. It's a fine that doesn't sound so serious, but it's a stain that will stay with a lot of them for a long time. An admission of guilt fine allows people who are accused of committing a minor offence to take responsibility without having to appear in court. Defence lawyer William Booth says it's a tempting offer, but one which has earned many of those arrested during lockdown criminal records.
It's pretty much become the order of the day since the lockdown regulations were promulgated in March last year. Often people don't know how it affects them in the future.
𝗧𝗵𝗶𝘀 says he wasn't aware of this when he had a brush with the law in April 2020. He was arrested for not wearing a mask in public when he was walking home from buying essentials at 𝗶𝗵𝗀 Mall in Tembisa.
Mask, abagencha mask, barno, are, manogala gamola le de plastic jagrosa.
Malachi spent the night in jail and was released on bail the following day. He was eager to move on from the traumatic experience, but unbeknown to him, his problems were just getting started. He works as a delivery driver, which requires a professional driver's permit. Months after his arrest, he discovered he cannot renew his permit as he now has a criminal record.
The company had the rules jayona jarne, August drive, osna valid license.
Malachi fears he will lose his job, and he still struggles with the memory of his first night in a holding cell. The whole point of the restrictions is to limit the spread of the disease, so we have masks. And you don't want people in crowded, enclosed spaces. And what do you do when they don't obey? You put them behind bars in enclosed, crowded spaces. Malachi feared contracting COVID-19 in a communal holding cell that he was sharing with several other detainees.
20 or 25.
This was also Dr. Henner Koster's concern on the 13th of February when he, together with his partner, 𝗀𝗀 𝗀𝗏 and their friend Sanette de Groen spent a night at the Silver Lakes police station.
There was no social distancing, no sanitizing stuff. And I mean, if they want to catch you for curfew, at least have things, in place at the cells as well.
They were nabbed outside of their estate for missing curfew by what Koster says were a few minutes. All three of them were driving back from a function when they realized a police van was following them.
And then we stopped at the gate, and then they jumped out, and then they started having quite an aggressive attitude towards us and didn't talk about curfew, nothing at all. They just started immediately saying that 𝗀𝗏 was doing reckless driving, she was chasing away from them.
After a heated exchange, the officers allegedly demanded the three follow them to the police station, where the women say they were physically abused.
As they took me into the cell, the next moment I had some steel thing in my eyes. They pushed the pepper spray into my mouth.
They pushed the pepper spray into your mouth?
Yes, they chipped my tooth when they sprayed it into my mouth. Later on, they actually did the same with 𝗀𝗀.
She came into the cells and said, "I'm going to teach you a lesson," and sprayed pepper spray in both of my eyes.
Similar cases of alleged police brutality were under the spotlight during hard lockdown. We covered a spike in reports of intimidation and violence against citizens in May 2020. A year on, and many of those who had run-ins with the police are saddled with criminal records. The three friends were released the next day after being charged for breaching the curfew and resisting arrest. Their case was thrown out of court 4 days later.
They just looked at it beforehand and said, I mean, this is this is not worth the case to waste time on.
Another man living in limbo is 𝗀𝗵𝗶𝘀𝗆 from Alexandra Township. He was arrested in April 2020 at a wedding celebration a few hours after curfew went into effect.
The night I was arrested, it was on a level 5 lockdown. My brother was getting married.
Why didn't you go home when the time was up?
We were having a good time. The groomsman didn't want us to go home. He said, guys, please, let's celebrate. This is my day.
Alexandra Township is one of the most densely populated areas in South Africa. Enforcing lockdown restrictions was always going to be a challenge at the best of times.
𝗵𝗶𝘀𝗆 also spent a night in jail and was released the following morning. He was able to get legal assistance, but his lawyer advised him to pay a fine. And now he says he's stuck with a criminal record that's affecting his prospects of finding a new job after being retrenched in the economic turmoil caused by the pandemic.
They said, I've got a criminal record. What must I do with that? So now I cannot be employed anywhere anymore.
John, some people will say, but you broke the law.
I've learned from my mistake. I'll never ever do that again.
Booth recommends that people arrested for contravening the lockdown regulations shouldn't sign the admission of guilt form, as it could take years for their records to be expunged.
You know, my advice is don't pay an admission of guilt, go and see a lawyer, and then they can approach the prosecutors to try and have the charges withdrawn.
The Department of Justice says it is aware that some cases related to the COVID-19 lockdown will attract criminal records if fines are paid. Minister of Justice spokesperson 𝗀𝗵𝗶𝗴𝗶𝘆 says the department has been working to raise awareness about the long-term implications.
Do you accept that most people who are told to sign an admission of guilt may do so without knowing they could potentially have a criminal record for up to 10 years?
I think the Department of Justice, through our Office of the Deputy Minister, has actually gone out to inform people that to be knowledgeable about this, signing an admission of guilt is ultimately getting yourself a criminal record.
Admission of guilt fines have long been on government's radar, even before lockdown. The issue is being addressed through the Judicial Matters Bill.
We had already looked at draft legislation to deal with these type of problems. Passing a bill is subject to Parliament also deliberating on it and really taking the executive on what the type of thinking was.
But as things stand, if you have a criminal record from a contravention of lockdown regulations, for example, that's a record that could stand for all those years?
That is the law as we speak today.
𝗶𝗶𝘶 says expunging criminal records incurred during lockdown is not a priority right now, especially with the third COVID-19 wave looming.
It just seems like we're using a sledgehammer to kill a fly.
It's definitely not a fly that we're killing here. These regulations are not there arbitrarily. They're there for us to prevent a severe catastrophic event where, like to witness what we are seeing in India is quite sad though.
Booth says the lockdown regulations stipulate that law enforcement officers should warn a person who violated the regulations before arresting them. This man, 𝗀𝗃 says no officer bothered to give him a warning before he was arrested. This video from the night shows 𝗃 trying to explain to officers that he broke the curfew to buy formula for his newborn baby.
Are you arresting me?
The milk, then from there we go.
Sir,
you are wasting your own time.
He doesn't want to identify himself either.
We realized that, but listen, Natasha's breast milk is starting to dry up. We decided, well, okay, we'll have to find a substitute, and that's formula milk.
𝗃 and 𝗀𝗃 believe the police didn't want to reason with them because they had a point to prove. Malaji, on the other hand, believes they simply had a target to reach.
But okay, target arena, ranyaga batu by 10. Then ever wanji bazamaya, bagira tuya batu. Then venila narina majorana barazama barisa police station.
𝗃 and 𝗀𝗃 were able to get their charges withdrawn because they had access to legal aid.
Those that were there the evening, they must get out of the police force. You know, I want to feel safe if I approach a policeman.
But people like Malaji, who aren't as financially stable, now face living with criminal records, with the limitations that imposes.
So if you can see, ida bantu alele, ke tswela gore maybe sekebo sa ke se fetša nako e ka kang.